and these gatekeepers, Fauci, Biden, the power they have, because the only way you're going to be able to actually pierce the veil is to finally, or at least try to rule out that they're sociopathic eugenicists. And they know no one's going to do that, so they get to cloak themselves and continue to play this plausible deniability.
Mm-hmm.
And our species is just so stupid that they're looking for this. They're looking for this empirical sign or amazing. I mean, we literally think Dr. Fauci is going to say, you know what, the vaccines, we're just not sure they're really safe, so don't take them. I mean, it's never going to happen. These gatekeepers are they're laughing. They're just it's so much power. It's incredible.
Yeah, and it's coded in a prestige that everyone is just supposed to agree that is legitimate. And that's what's so upsetting to me is, even when, intelligent people I know who get critical about maybe some of these matters, they'll just back off in toto when it comes to the construction of legitimacy around, one of these experts' credentials, for example. Oh, I can't go there. I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, to what extent have you researched the guild system that was prominent for pretty much all sectors of knowledge and economics in the Roman Empire? Do you know much about that? Because then they'll be like, oh, no. And be like, well, our modern quote-unquote academic system is pretty much entirely modeled off the old guild system.
Yeah. I've got intellectuals that tell me they don't even care about history because this is just a totally different system, and we can't use history as a reference.
Oh, yeah, just put the head firmer into the sand, and the message will,
The thing that's so incredible, if you actually look at all our systems, finance, medical, whatever, when you get to the foundations, there is a missing pillar. There's always a missing pillar. And if you cannot identify that all these systems are not grounded in logic, there is your pattern. Mm-hmm. There is your pattern that something is askew, something isn't right. You Lucifer has blinded you with the light.
Yes, which is a counterfeit logic.
They do not hold up to reason. There's always some piece missing.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the cornerstone, so to speak.
And casuistry, coming up with sophisticated tactics within debate for persuasion's sake, but never actually getting to the core of the argument.
I know people who just play devil's advocate to play devil's advocate, but once I inquire, and that's our tagline, proceed by inquiry. If you just ask enough questions, you get them to show their hand. Mm-hmm. They get so irritated.
Yep.
Like, I was cornered once at a social gathering because I wasn't supporting Trump. I was simply correcting the actual fact of the matter that was being stated about. At that time, it was 2016 pre-election, pre-nomination, and it was stated by someone in the company, it's like the Trump channel. And I was like, well, only, in a pejorative sense towards Trump. And he was contending it was more of it's just a pure advertisement for him. It's positive, nothing but positive news. And if you go back to that time, it was very much slanted against Trump. And in the course of this discussion, I got into this back and forth, and somebody, pegged me as a Trump supporter, even though I wasn't saying I supported him. I was just correcting the fact that it was actually negative press. It was all, signs point to Hillary getting into the office. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, why don't you say something positive about Trump that doesn't mention Hillary or Obama? And I'm like, well, you're presuming that I would say something about Hillary or Obama before I've even said it. Mm-hmm. Also, I'm not, just so we're clear, I'm not going to vote.
Right.
I'm not a voter. And this individual's husband was like, oh, I hate people who, and then he caught himself, was like, why aren't you going to vote? So he like kind of showed his hand, like he really hates people who don't vote. And it was very, I felt abrasive to his worldview that I would have a perspective on the political race that's unfolding, at the same time not throw my hat into the ring by voting for one or the other, that you wanted to pin me as being this or that,
right?
And such as it is, that goes back to that meme we talked about, like, I'm not going to use a bunch of simplistic platitudes,
right,
for your benefit, and be catty-cornered into this position as whatever you want to, I'm a conservative white male, whatever you've got painted in your head,
yeah.
It's a discussion, a rational, logical discussion first and foremost.
Well, and a lot of these worldviews that people have, it's like a Simon Says game in their head that's constantly going on. And Simon, is the proverbial, consensus that, you have to constantly appeal to whatever is correct according to the consensus. That's Simon. So if Simon says white people are bad, then it's okay to talk about white people as being inherently evil, and they have a monopoly on world historic hegemonic violence, and all this stuff.
These presumptions,
and all these totally vicious presumptions that are really just based in slander. But as soon as the voice in the head is like, oh well, look into black on white violence. Oh, Simon didn't say. Yeah. So people have their own governors in their head that they don't even look into things, because the governor comes in and is like, Simon, and it's like, no, that's not part of the consensus. You shouldn't look into that.
Right.
That's actually evil in itself to look into.
Right.
So it perpetuates the ignorance as a sort of pariah tactic.
That's so true.
Yeah. And that's why it's so sophisticated and sort of reptilian, is that it operates on that level of social conformism,
touching you on the shoulder.
Mm-hmm. It's fight or flight. A lot of it has to do with getting our species into a fight or flight state, getting us into the reptilian brain, getting us out of the executive part of our brain, dumping the biochemistry where you're not able to think logically or think later down the line. It's instant gratification, and mm-hmm. a lot of the brainwashing has to do with that. Like for instance, a very simple understanding is how the body and mind works. Like our mind is constantly time traveling. Mm-hmm. In reality, what should be happening is our mind should be together with our body. When our mind is present with our body, the body actually feels relaxed. But when the mind's in the future thinking about problems, the body doesn't know what the mind's thinking. The body's in a primitive state. What's happening is the mind's in the future thinking about a problem, thinking it's going to organize it. But the body is like, the mind's not here and it's producing anxiety. There must be a saber-toothed tiger or bear around stalking me. And then the body's physiological experiences to stop it from bleeding out because it's going to lose an arm. And we haven't been taught this knowledge. We should be teaching this knowledge to elementary school kids. So we become so easily programmable, so easily directed. So it's also it's also the nature of like the logos of our consciousness. I really do believe the logos of our consciousness is in our unconscious system, which is incredibly sophisticated. I think has total recall, probably the gateway to God. But our logos is in our mind, and they have stimulated our mind, caused it to have such a strong ego and be ruminating on mental projections that we don't even listen to our unconscious, and we're kind of trapped in this this mental state. And I definitely believe that's one of the big causes of our brainwashing.
Is the inconcretization and the regimentation to uphold that mental state as the sine qua non standard for reality. And the thing is that's so interesting about the extremism that you were talking about earlier is that comes out around this exact same sort of racial issue. Is the second that you want to advocate for positive attributions and accomplishments within so-called white civilization, that automatically makes you a white supremacist. Notice how there's an extremist turn of events there, that you can't simply be a white advocate.
There's no such thing.
Right?
There is no such thing.
There's no such thing as just being someone who advocates.
And I'll be told that from another so-called white person.
Exactly.
I'll be damned.
It's like, wait,
I'll be damned.
So you have to have someone from a different ethnicity defend and advocate for you as a white person? And then if you corner them on that, they'll eventually say yes. Because we know what happens when historically we want to advance things that are of our purported interest, and we end up genociding other people that are part of us actually, but we just don't like them. And then of course you have these huge historical invectives, right, that are pre-programmed into people's minds to keep that glaring contradiction at bay. And it's these sort of balms that people have, these credos that they'll recite about why you can't advocate, basic accomplishments and attributions that can be designated as only belonging to quote-unquote white civilization. And so there's that extremist element there where that acts as a credo. Like, people are already so extremist in their disgust at the possibility of there being a benign white advocate that they have to turn him into a boogeyman. They have to turn him into a thing that needs to accord to the pattern of vilification that is already been programmed into them. My
favorite short circuit to this mentality is bringing up black slave owners.
Oh, yes. Okay. Very, very good one, too.
I love this. So I've got up here on Wikipedia Anthony Johnson. You can look him up, colonist. He's the first person to legally own a slave in America. Note, the first person to legally own. He was not the first person to own. Okay? Legally own. The most prominent early colonial black to acquire freedom and wealth. So he's one of many, many black slave owners who were living in America pre-Civil War with slaves. So that, to me, that's a major short circuit of the whole what is Project 17?
It's Project 1619 or something.
Or whatever. It's a major short circuit to that, because there are families still who own land from, pre-Civil War era, family land, black folks who kept slaves on their property. They still live in the country and have massive tracts of land and wealth. So it's a total mythology that, this institutional, actually, it's not a mythology. Institutional racism was implemented, in my opinion, post-Civil Rights Act, and it was eugenics based. It laid the framework for federal regulation and diversity requirements. So it actually isn't
welfare state.
It and the welfare state, with LBJ's Great Society, absolutely. There is institutional racism, but it's not what is popularly understood to be institutional racism. I'm supposed to be, as a quote unquote white male, a beneficiary of this so-called institutional racism.
When nothing could be further from the truth. Right.
I'm not.
Right.
And that's why I like that rapper Tom McArnold, his line in that show, his song Fake Woke. He said, I've always thought Black Lives Matter was the stupidest name because the system is screwing everybody exactly the same.
Yeah.
That's the truth. It is eugenics based, like that Facebook guy said, the head of global planning. It is eugenics based. And, there is sort of a penchant for hurting black people. And that's what I try to communicate to my aunt, who was like, you're in this information bubble being a conservative white male, blah, 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 against COVID. The minorities are being hurt by this. They need the vaccine the most. And I was like, show me the statistics on that, because I think black people are generally pretty skeptical of government vaccination programs, given the historical record of the U.S. government being willing to experiment on them
through deception
and hurting them in more ways than one. So, it's not a myth that there is an institutional racist architecture to what's going on. And it is only getting worse as we see, now schools are holding session in segregated manner now, right? Yeah. Some universities are doing that, like, to make up for past wrongs, I guess.
And it's usually it's ironically at the request of many of these woke
white
groups.
Folks, especially, right? So-called white folks.
Or that there needs to be black-only spaces, for example, on campus, because we don't need any colonizers in here. And so you see this kind of voluntary return into a segregationist mentality.
Isn't that crazy? That is
it's come full circle. Reverse racism, reverse sexism.
Yeah, and then
climate change. I mean,
climate change.
What they did is, like, if you can have a rational discussion, you can get to the cause. But what they've done is they've muddied the cause, and they've redirected it into these woke ideologies and climate change and so forth. So to get people to understand the truth, they have to have a nuanced discussion. Sure, it's part of it, but here's why it's getting manipulated, and it's being manipulated so these Satanists can get world control.
Well, I mean, if you can extrapolate the terminology around Satan into more general occult terms, then that realization is actually completely unavoidable.
Yeah.
When you look at the amount of money that actually gets channeled to entities that uphold the symbology, rhetoric, and infrastructure. That literally...
it's always the same characters too. It's these same companies. It's these, Council on Foreign Relations. I mean, it's Rockefeller. It's just it winds up going all back to these same powerful eugenic characters.
Well, all roads kind of lead to Rome in that sense.
Right, all roads, yeah.
All roads lead back to Rome, because
it becomes what happens is I think what we're talking about is it becomes a singularity of evil and becomes a singularity of good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, that's too one-dimensional for us sophisticated moderns. We need gray rainbows everywhere, and we can't withstand the idea of either or. Everything has to be both and all this other surrealist illogic that's really accelerated in the 20th century, but has gone into hyperdrive in the 21st century.